half hour,
Looked at this and that.
maybe 5:25. They were
We have
police
our.
there.
So,
So it might have just been starting. Yeah, kind of to the front and then up the hill a little bit.
I think it's a big job for Mill City, but for Colliers, yes.
Too small. Oh, because they were looking for this.
They were looking for
Right on that
this.
screen there,
Yeah.
right? That's
No,
They've done it enough that I
Yeah.
actually know how to
He's a
fix
good
it.
kid. I'll send him.
my best until he shows up.
Chris, I have the agenda on the.
That's it, public comment.
We don't have any bills, right?
No invoices.
All right. Bob, are we good to get started? All right. So just listening to me kind of prattle on about our. All right. Well, then I will call to order the January 3rd, 2023. I got that right. Meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee 2. We'll go over our agenda first, and then we'll get right into it. We have to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting on December 13th. We're going to discuss the MSBA feedback on the preliminary design. I never remember. Program. Thank you. Report. I almost said packet. We're going to report some feedback on an update that a few of us did to the select board before the holiday. Then we'll review and discuss the district-wide study report, as well as the updated design options. We'll prep for our next community forum, and then we'll spend a little bit of time reviewing the updated meeting schedule, because we've got a lot of meetings that are either directly connected to this committee or tangentially connected to this committee, so I want to make sure everybody's clear on what's what. So as always, we start with public comment. At the moment, we have some committee members in the public comment seats, so I'm assuming, unless you tell me otherwise, that you're not here for public comment, and we will move right along and leave it open. If anyone from the public does show up, we can revisit. The first item is approval of the December 13th, 2022 meeting minutes. They were provided in the packet, so hopefully everyone had a chance to read them over. Were there any questions or comments? Hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the meeting minutes of December 13th, 2022.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Mike, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Tiffany. We have no one remote tonight, so we can vote normally. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, and it is unanimous, and the meeting minutes are approved.
That was 6, right?
I was just going to do an account for you. 6. Yep, 6. Okay. Next, we will discuss MSBA feedback on the PDP report, and I believe that's going to be a relatively short conversation.
That's correct. So they sent back and made their initial request for the signed local action letter by the select board chair, which we've now returned back to them. They've also requested the certified minutes of your December 7th meeting, which we now have back from the town clerk. So that completes the items that we owed them. I asked them how their comments were reviewing. It's with senior staff at the MSBA now, so we expect to receive them this week. We do not have written feedback as of yet.
Typically, when those come back, is that are those comments usually things that get worked through at the kind of the professional working group level, or will they come back to the meeting here, our next meeting, for any action?
The OPM and the design team handle the response to all comments. If it elevates beyond that, then we'll reach out to the chair for any clarification. But generally, it's all things that are within our purview to respond to.
Great. Any questions from the committee about that topic? Okay. So next item on the agenda is feedback on the update to the select board. So just in a general update, myself and Mike and Bill and Carol and Susan all attended the select board meeting on December 22nd, I think it was, somewhere around there. And to provide an update on the project, we gave them a very short presentation and reserved most of the time for Q&A. I'll ask the others who participated to kind of weigh in with their thoughts, but for the most part, everything that was related to the project was fairly status quo. The bulk of their questions will be actually a nice lead-in to our next agenda topic, because they had a lot of questions about the larger kind of school facility needs, spending plan going forward, what kind of the impacts were going to be. As far as the project went, we did talk a little bit about the cost updates that we had been provided. They understood that obviously things are getting more expensive, and we shared where we were when it comes to the site options, and I don't think there were a lot of questions there. Anything I missed?
That's pretty much it.
I think for the full committee's benefit, if it was a little bit of a preview of some of the conversations we're going to be having with the community going forward, connecting the Elmwood project as a part of the larger capital and facility plan for the school district is going to be critical. Because there were a lot of questions about that they seem to be focused not so much on the Elmwood project itself, but in terms of what is the whole thing well beyond Elmwood going to cost, what are the time frames of construction, all of those pieces. So I think there's no way, even if we had considered that as a possibility, that we're going to be able to sort of carve Elmwood out from that larger discussion when we start engaging the public even more in that discussion.
One of the things I think that as the committee to keep in mind is the Elmwood project really is an end-of-life replacement. You know, similar to Marathon was the end-of-life replacement for Center School. So I think we always have to remind the community back to that the Elmwood project is an end-of-life replacement. The district is future planning, you know, what we're about to talk about. But to keep kind of pulling back to that very granular piece of what the Elmwood project is.
Absolutely, that's a good point. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Then next we're going to review the system-wide or the district-wide study report, and so I'm turning that over to Bob or Dan or both of you.
You want to do some introductory comments about it first?
Yeah, that's a good point. We talked about that earlier today, didn't we? Yeah. So, it was my idea. So I just before we get into this, I think what's important to do is just sort of pull back for the public's benefit and maybe for the committee's benefit too, about sort of how what we're about to hear connects back to our charge as the elementary school building committee, because I think Perkins is going to be seeking some feedback on what they have today, but I think it's important to sort of just reset roles a little bit. So as a reminder, the district-wide study was an appropriation that the school committee and school district had made at a prior town meeting. From an efficiency perspective and a connection to the Elmwood project, it made sense to not only have Perkins perform the district-wide study, but also have it under the management of the elementary school building committee, since we're working with Perkins on a daily basis anyway. The reason I bring that up is because as we think about feedback and questions tonight, this is being presented to the school committee Thursday. Our primary job as an elementary school building committee when it comes to this district-wide study is almost at a project management level to make sure the deliverable meets what was asked. The larger conclusions that come from it and what's going to be done with it beyond Elmwood are really the school committee's responsibility. So I just want to make sure that everybody kind of approaches it from that perspective. There are certainly impacts to the Elmwood project that will be felt in here, but I want to just kind of say that so we don't get sort of too far out over our skis when it comes to what the impact is more broadly. that feedback really needs to come from the school committee first before we see what the impact is from the ESBC. So Jeff, do you want to tee up kind of the?
Yeah, no, so the great introductory comments, the charge of the system-wide study that Perkins was under was to understand and assess the building's needs throughout the district, all the various buildings that were, and we thought of it in terms of containers. So how many classrooms do you need? Where might additions go be added onto the building? It's a recommendation that comes out of that, but it's not a full master planning study. So there were many variants and many variables that go into this. So there are a lot of rabbit holes that you can go down. But the primary charge of the district-wide study is to understand the need that's out there. And that's the summary that you're going to see here. For today's purposes, because of the audience that we're getting into, we don't need to spend as much time on where those additions might go. Because as John noted, we just want to make sure it's a complete deliverable. The parts that tie back to the Elmwood School project are schedule and cost, because that is a broader impact of the same dialogues we'll be having with the community. So they understand the timing of our project versus the other parallel projects that will happen either concurrent or post Elmwood project. There are dollars associated with that. They're based on moments in time. When those get shifted by the school committee, that will obviously affect the cost. And you could do more at once, or you could string it over a longer period of time. And so those are some of the feedback that they'll be looking for the school committee to deliver. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Bob to open it up.
Okay, great. And so I'm going to get started in that vein with kind of skimming over some of the additions. I'm going to show you all the content that we'll be presenting Thursday night. I'll start with what the contents are. So we talk about the purpose, scope, and process, some of what has been just explained. And then we begin with the projected enrollment and trying to understand capacity. And capacity is not binary. It's actually a little bit more of a fluid determination, and you'll see that in some of our assessment. And then we turn that enrollment projection into the space needs, and we march through the different schools and the different configurations. At the end, we put it all to a timeline, and that's where there's some flexibility as far as where things land, but it's based on some logical assumptions, and that also helps determine the cost, which we'll see. And then the appendix is a voluminous set of documents that no one probably wants to dive into, but it's the backup data for all the space calculations. So some of these slides you've seen before. They're updated a little bit, but this really just talks about the purpose, scope, and process. I won't read all this, but as has been stated, this is really a statement of the needs. It's a pathway, and it can be fine-tuned, but the alternative configurations and those types of decisions would reside with the school committee. So I'll begin with the projected enrollment. This is also a slide that that you're all familiar with. What we see here are the current enrollments for each grade, and then grouped for the current configuration of schools. And then we see the projected enrollments out to 2032. These are the MSBA's 10-year average enrollments. So it's not the high point or the spike of any given year in any given grade, but it's the average. And this was used not only because it was a slightly higher number than the alternative demographic information that was solicited, but also it aligns with exactly the agreement that we have with the MSBA on the Elmwood School project. So we painted this picture for both the current configuration as well as the grade 2, 3, 4 configuration. One of the early diagrams that we did was take a look at each one of the schools and understand, how these were planned. Over the years, there have been additions, there's modulars that have been added, there are rooms that have been repurposed. So we took a snapshot of what you have for spaces right now and looked at what the planned class sizes are, what the objectives are to determine what is the capacity of the school. So we did that with each one of the schools. And we can see across the top dark line here that the as-planned enrollment is pretty close right now to the current enrollment, at least at the elementary schools, and there's some relief as we go deeper into the grade structure. What this tells us is that the work that the town has been doing with the modulars, with the additions, have been absolutely keeping pace with the growth that you've seen. But what we anticipate and see in the 10-year average projections is a much larger swell of enrollment, and so that's what we're focused on. These space needs that we've determined are shown here in this matrix. We have each school. You're seeing gray rows that represent the current configuration for each one of the schools, and then the beige or yellow rows are showing you the alternative configuration. And what we've done here is look at the existing enrollment versus projected, the existing gross square footage versus projected, and then what that delta is. Early on, we presented this information. It was just based on really broad square foot numbers. These are based on more actuals now, so that we've gone deeper into detail on the study. But I think what's really most important is to look at the projected room needs. So regardless of the square footage, the buildings can take a number of different shapes. It's really the quantity of classrooms that need to be added, the additional special education space, where cafeterias or other larger spaces need to increase in square footage. So that's what we've done here. You've also seen an earlier version of this, so this is just very preliminary look at what additions might look like, what the square footages might look like applied to each school. So the upper row is the current configuration. The lower row is the alternative configuration. The marathon would be the same in both, but one of the things that we did in this study was explore an offshoot, which, or at least begin the study of what it might look like if pre-K were removed, possibly taking advantage of Elmwood if that school was vacated, or building it as standalone. Just the preliminary look at that information says that requires a much more detailed study, probably even looking back into taking a new look at projections. This shows the total square footage of those additions in aggregate. If you take the current Elmwood School project out of the mix, we can see about 108 versus 68,000 square feet for the two different configurations. What we did through an iterative process of meeting with the educational team, which includes educational leadership and facilities and finance, and input that came from whether it be the building committee or from the school committee in our earlier sharing of some information. We've taken a look at each one of the sites where we might want to build onto each one of the schools, plug that program in. And we did that for the Marathon School, obviously for Hopkins. In either configuration, it turns out it's about the same. Whenever the logical place for an addition affects the roadways, we've tried to account for the parking displacement and maybe improve some circulation that needed to be remedied as a result. So we have plans that step through the Hopkins as well. For the middle school, we have both the 6-8, the current configuration, potential additions, and the floor plans that align with those, and also the grade 7-8, which by removing one grade certainly creates a lot of potentially or unused space that can become available for, say, the high school. In this case, we are still showing a small addition to increase science labs where they exist currently. And again, we can go into detail if we need to, but I'm going high level over these additions. For both the middle school and for the high school, there's a desire to potentially connect the schools so that it might offer greater flexibility long-term and greater opportunity academically. So some of the areas that we looked at and we're showing here are actually in the space between the two schools, and there is a means to connect them and utilize that as an opportunity. And finally, the grade, the 9-12 high school, if the middle school was the 6-8, and it would not be able to utilize some of the vacated space in the middle school, here we're showing a consolidated addition in the front. And with some of these, it requires additional permitting process if there's wetlands or zoning impacts or other fire safety or perimeter access concerns. So each one of these may take a slightly different path, and I think that's reflected in the timeline. So going right to the timeline, we really started looking at the timeline by understanding the year-by-year projected enrollments. And there's a science to this, but it's really based on guesstimations. In this case, it was the MSBA's projected enrollments that were used. We filtered this to show what those collective enrollment projections are for each school in your current configuration. And then we looked at what is the capacity. Again, not being a black and white answer to understand capacity, what we're seeing here is everything in green is a cascade that shows your current number of built spaces, classrooms, the ideal classroom size that's been stated. It's 15 students per pre-K, it's 18 for kindergarten, it's 22 for elementary, and 23 for grades beyond. And within the screen, it's suggesting that you may reach an enrollment that requires 1 or 2 more students per room. So it's still within a reasonable tolerance of handling spikes. When we get into the yellow, what we're seeing is you will definitely need a few more students on average per classroom, but you'll need to go a little bit further, possibly repurposing some, in the case of the elementary schools, some of the related art spaces to yield more classrooms, putting maybe art or music on a cart. Or you could choose to add 1 more student or more per classroom. So there's variables there, but you're getting into the yellow. You're starting to do some of the things that the district has recently had to do until additions or modulars could be put on the buildings. And what's shown here in red is what we might call the break point, and there's a little wiggle room in that, but what that says is you have repurposed rooms, you've got 2 or more students per classroom. You're really at the point where you're needing to add space. And there are things that you can do to buy time. That's why capacity isn't, it's not an exact number that you can put on a school or on a project, because there are some schools more than others. There are spaces that could be converted without much compromise to the program. In some schools, that's not the case. In a high school, for example, we've applied the convention of an 85% utilization for each room, because different than an elementary school where students are assigned and fixed into a homeroom and then travel out for related arts. In the high school, they're all scheduled independently. 85% is the convention that suggests you've got that flexibility so that students can choose the electives they want, and you can schedule them accordingly. So things like that in the high school also, could generate more capacity if you went to a higher utilization in your room. But we thought this was a pretty straightforward lens to put on the enrollments, so that you could see relatively when you're hitting the critical points. We then put a filter on this to show the Elmwood project as a grade 2-3, and if I toggle just back and forth, you can see that project immediately relieves the Elmwood School. To Susan's point, I think the reason why Elmwood is a project right now is that it's reached the end of its useful life, and was the priority going into the MSBA. If we look forward to the grade 2-3-4 project, you can now see that in the green we have grades, the Elmwood 2-3, but also the 4th grade. That creates some relief in the middle school, so you can see the middle school is now green. There's plenty of spaces within that. So now you're addressing Marathon Middle and High School, Marathon Hopkins and the high school as far as when you're hitting those red zones. The other thing, and I'll let Jeff speak to this, we put together 2 probable timelines, projecting out each project, showing the Elmwood School project, but then showing what would be maybe one version of charting these projects over time that affects cost. And we added the kind of the red line on here, or the moment when you hit that type of a capacity impact.
Thanks, Bob. So the orange or the reddish hue here responds back to Bob's prior charts of when you saw you got into that heavier time frame, because we wanted to overlay that. So the green represents our project, where we would naturally flow through the rest of our process through a town funding vote at the end of the year, and then on to design. starting construction in, say, January 2025. Now, the outcome varies a little between whether a 2-3 or a 2-4 solution. Based on the size of the building, we can deliver it a little quicker if it's 2-3. It does not naturally meet the summertime of the summer of 2026, so though it's hard to read at the scale, that says October delivery. There are decisions that are still in front of the committee once you decide which solution you're going with and which location you're going with, whether we choose to be a construction manager or general contractor. This is the more conservative, linear path of a general contractor. So depending on the location you choose, and if you choose CMR, there's an ability for those to move. But right now, for uniformity, we showed it as a general contractor from a conservative standpoint. And just in perspective, the 2-4 would be December, so it's about a 2-month difference for the larger building overall. As you see in the red hue there, Hopkins is the next highest priority, that is going to hit critical mass closest. We know there's a need there today at that existing building, regardless of whether the grade configuration is a 5-6 or a 4-5. It does not handle 2 grades today. So we prioritize that in this timeline. All of these things can be adjusted, talking to the school committee and understanding their needs, but working off the work that Bob and his team have done, we see that's the greatest need the fastest. And so we've prioritized Hopkins as the next likely project to go forward. Because you're not going through an MSBA process and it's an addition project, you can proceed through design and funding and permitting much faster than a full Elmwood project. And so you can actually catch up to where the Elmwood is and actually run both projects concurrently in terms of construction duration. And the Hopkins School project would be available in the summer of 2026 for the start of that school year. The modular component may not be available because that would obviously be tied to whenever Elmwood is done and turned over. So those last couple of rooms would come subsequent to the completion of the rest of the Hopkins projects. So from there, we looked at a master planning, and the scheme that's in front of you here is a 2-3 configuration. And so here, because we're not bringing the 6th grade down to Hopkins, there's no relief for swing space. That'll be the benefit of the 2-4 option you'll see in a second. So here we kept the middle school and high school as separate projects. We start off with a master planning phase for both of them together, because as you saw from Bob's options, it essentially can be treated as a campus. And that is something you can look at both, whether it's a 2-3 configuration for Elmwood or a 2-4, that option still exists. So we would look at the parallelness of studying both buildings and where additions would go. And then you could either move forward with both projects at the same time or embark on one first. In this case, we showed the high school is the first start on, because again, critical mass there hit higher where the red shows there. We also don't have the benefit of swing space, so I staggered the start time here by a year for the middle school project to follow a year after the start of the high school so that the additions could come online and we could start to cascade and move students around the building. A lot of study still needs to be done on this before it moves forward as a full project, and I used that with our opening comments that this is a path forward and an achievable path forward, but really understanding the granularity of what those additions are, what they serve, is an effort into itself that will follow on after this district-wide study. And then jump into Marathon, as Bob alluded, there were a few options there. We could go with the consolidated option of the largest addition at the Marathon School itself, and that's what this colored chart represents. There are also sub-variants where you could potentially reuse portions of Elmwood, but that comes with cost and study of itself, or potentially a standalone building if the need is continuing to grow in town. And so, we targeted a study there as well. The dates you see here are lined up with town meetings in terms of either a May or a fall, November town meeting. But what you start to see with the chart here is that essentially the school would need to move forward with an ask at each of the upcoming town meetings, both annual and a fall special, for the preceding 5-6 years in order to get all these buildings addressed with the need that's already with us today. I'm going to go to the next slide a second. So the deviation here when you go to 2-4 is that by going with the 2-4 solution, you're addressing more of the needs up front with the Elmwood project. You're only delivering that a few months later, but would be in time for the winter turnover of a December break of 2027. 26 into 27. So yeah, so January 27, that building would be online to move over. And so you've addressed some of the needs there with the middle school overcrowding. It also provides a lot of swing space available by decompressing the needs of the middle school, high school. So you have more time to have a more efficient phased renovation of a high school and middle school addition together. So you see that red kind of pushes out further, and there's a lot more ability to deal with capacity within that particular option. In this instance, both the Hopkins and the Marathon are treated the same. So the variant here really is the middle school, high school treated as one project, and you're addressing their needs more rapidly under the consolidated 2-4 approach.
So I have a question,
Sure.
and I'm trying not to ask school committee questions here.
Sure.
But if we're talking, as we've been talking about possibly decoupling the pre-K from Marathon, if we're looking at the design option where we have basically Marathon and the new Elmwood project sort of tied to each other in a larger campus, is there a way to kind of leave room for a pre-K type building inside of that larger space that we're looking at?
Certainly something that this committee can look at as a variable as you look at the master planning options. And you're going to see, I think it's 3 options tonight that look at Hayden Row in terms of where the building could be situated on Hayden Row itself. And you could tuck and pull and shift that ultimate solution. You know, we're starting to look at different geometries on Hayden Row as to where that would look like. And the same with Elmwood. You know, Elmwood's a little more consolidated in terms of what you can work with, because you're trying to keep your existing building if you were to build new on that particular
Yeah,
site.
I was specifically thinking of the Hayden Row.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. Thank you.
And then, yeah.
Then, so then to take the timeline and put it to costs, what we have here is an opinion, an order of magnitude costs. So these are not actual, and we've also rounded them. But what we can look at here is the grade 2-3 and the grade 2-4 configuration, but really gathering the estimate for all the schools. So we have an assumption about the completion date, the square footage that we're projecting, or the additions. We also took a closer look at the level of renovation, so if it's a light renovation or major reconfiguration of space inside for the square footages, to come up with these numbers. We've looked at the probable site work, and again, because this is really just a little bit of a master planning exercise, it's not a deep dive into the conditions within each building, but also into the soils. So we've accounted for that with some allowances and kind of contingencies. We've escalated it out to the future, midpoint of construction, I believe.
Matches up with Jeff's schedule.
So we stress the word an opinion of order of magnitude
Opinion of
cost,
potential
because
cost.
there are a lot of crystal balls in there. I'll state it for the viewing public at home, because I know you've heard it from me before, but we don't know what escalation is going to do. You know, we've projected this out several years, and escalation is the closer you are to the start point, the more certainty you are. You know, right now, we don't know whether there is a recession on the horizon or whether it will continue to climb as it has the past couple of years. Everyone believes that it won't certainly go that steeply up. But with the appendix, it shows some of the assumptions that were put in there, where it's 7% for the first year and then dropping down to 4%, you know, for subsequent years, which kind of returns more to normal baseline. The other thing to note is that
That's what we got.
the cost in terms of dollars for the site are not documented right now. They're just benchmarks. You may choose to do more with the site. We may need more parking. We may need more reconfiguration of the fields at Hopkins. That's why Hopkins shows a little more site work than some of the others. As Bob noted, depending on where the addition may go at the high school, there may be wetlands replication and relocation. So another variable, if we do the addition between the high school, middle school, we have to meet with public safety and determine if there are any special requirements for those changes in terms of separation. So there's a lot of factors that can influence the overall cost. So although the initial dollars may look similar for the total value, and I know people focus on, you know, a total value of, you know, 327 million here, there are other variables that will go into defining whether the addition renovation options dramatically change depending on which solution you pick for a larger or smaller Elmwood as the impact of the middle high school. I also note that, we put out a metric, because I know the question would come up on estimated potential reimbursement. We put a 20 to 25% real dollar value of your total project cost. Your MSBA reimbursement is 45% from a baseline standpoint, but they cap out at various requirements. And it's also, if you don't spend it, neither one of you spends the dollars, so the effective dollar is not a grant in terms of a total dollar amount. If there's shared savings, both you and the state would share in certain elements of those savings. So we projected out an effective reimbursement rate of approximately 25% of the overall cost that the town could expect back. I will note that the MSBA just changed their reimbursement rates as of December 21st. So we have yet to receive the response back in terms of the details of how that is implemented. It's good news. They're looking to go up. So they went up in the overall dollars per square foot that they're going to reimburse, but they went down in the site dollars. You happen to have a larger site, so that's why I say I have to run the calculations with your dollars. It benefits urban projects in terms of they had smaller sites, so they were spreading the dollars per square foot of the educational space more. So we will run those numbers for you next month when we get our updated estimates, but I did want to put that qualifier. So that could tick up this percentage more, but from a conservative standpoint, we didn't want to overpromise to the community. So I know it's a long-winded explanation, but...
And I'd say just one other point that I think is clear here too, when we talk about the potential reimbursement, that's only on the current Elmwood project. And so we can see the difference between the 2.3 and the 2.4. In the end, it's about a $15 million difference between configurations.
And it isn't as clear from the slide at this scale, but the Marathon School is based on the same amount for both the 2.3 and the 2.34 option. The variation occurs in the Hopkins and the high school largely, and that's a result of the effect that the grade configuration has going up, that it doesn't have going down. Obviously, with the feasibility study that we recommend for studying pre-K in Marathon, that would have the biggest effect overall in what that value would change to as that project develops.
So are we on Q&A?
We are.
Yeah.
Okay, so questions?
I have a question. So the $15 million difference between the two grade configurations gets offset by a future Hopkins project that would be smaller. Is that right? Or a saving?
No, so from a benchmarking standpoint, the dollars that are shown on the screen are, the assumption is the Hopkins and the Marathon school projects would be essentially the same from a starting standpoint. And that the variables are whether we go with the larger Elmwood school and the smaller middle high school addition. And the difference on going with the larger Elmwood school and having the MSBA reimbursement is essentially $15 million less that the town would need to borrow. Okay. So if you want a parking lot Hopkins and the Marathon school and just focus on Elmwood middle and high school, the savings to the town could be around $15 million if the larger 2 to 4 grade was selected. And it would be delivered earlier. One grade would be addressed earlier in the timeline by having the larger Elmwood project. So there are multiple benefits to that.
Thank you.
Leah?
Like I said, I'm trying to separate.
You get another bite of the apple here, so.
I'm just trying to leave the questions that are school committee questions to the school committee. So I'm having like blurry line problems right now.
You'll have another chance.
Yes, exactly.
I don't have any questions.
I gotta start saving.
Yeah.
John, can I ask a fast question?
No, you sat over there.
I know. I sat on the wrong
You
side of the
completely took
table.
away your opportunity. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Of course.
So I just want to understand the top option here, the middle school, high school, is like $110, $111-ish million. And down here, it's $80 million. And that difference comes from what?
So we're assuming that there's more building being added to the middle school in the larger, so that $30 million
Oh,
is
yeah.
right.
Okay.
So
There's
you're
more
addressing
construction.
you're addressing one grade in that component versus one grade in the Elmwood component. So the Elmwood on the bottom chart is the larger option at 164 million versus 127. And so part of that is made up in that delta, Elmwood small versus Elmwood large. But by getting 25% back, you're gaining several $1 million back from the state in addition to that.
Right, if you hook back to the slide that has I was looking at the projected classrooms, if you keep Elmwood at 2-3, the middle school needs 11 more classrooms. If you make it 2-3-4, the middle school is showing an excess of 10 classrooms.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that's where
Yeah,
the caution, where you don't need to add to it because you're actually making it.
A lot of that cost comes out of the reconfiguration of the existing middle school since it loses a grade,
Right.
and it can be shared with the high school.
Thanks, that makes sense.
And then, just on the dollars, because I always have to emphasize it, both the Hopkins and the middle school and high school are addition renovations that come with potential code trigger upgrades. So we took a best stab at that based on the information known at this high level. Those dollars may rise up the more you dig into the building, the more you trigger additional code upgrades from those older buildings. And so the ad renos have a greater ability to trigger up. Marathon was a new school, so when you do an addition to Marathon, you're not triggering that because that's already at the current codes or recent codes. But the older the building is, the more you'll have to trigger for life safety and things like that.
Under the 2-4, you combine the middle school and high school for the 80 million. Can you ballpark how much would be more? Is the middle school that's taking more of that because of it's older? And you talk about the code upgrade. That's what I think about with middle school compared to high school. But
I mean, we were thinking, I don't know if Dan, you want to answer that, but it was more geared to the high school because the middle school had the backfill of decompressing into the available spaces,
Okay.
so that
Under
we
the
were
2-4.
net adding to the high school. We may do it in that, we'll call it the link building.
Okay.
Between the two, that could be a shared resource from either building, so we hadn't quite defined it. We were looking from a containers standpoint, like where do we fit the containers? And then you could choose to kind of carve out middle school programs and high school programs to kind of more freely flow versus being isolated. And that would be an operational discussion.
So I will ask this one question here. When you were looking at the projections for classrooms, you're just using the numbers projections, right? Like, I guess the reason I'm asking is when you look at Marathon, for instance, they're already using extra space for classrooms. When you're looking at Hopkins, they're already using extra space for classrooms, but in this, it's saying it's green. So that kind of feels like a mismatch in my head of what's been happening versus what we're saying we have.
So I think when they did their projections, they projected with our addition that we're currently building on there.
Okay.
And that puts everything back to
Okay.
green. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
That's right. That's
it's an
correct.
asterisk on the plan that we're looking forward since
Okay.
that is happening.
Okay.
Other questions? We got a couple, well, if others think of. This is more can you go, actually, you don't have to go back. On the enrollment configuration slide, one thing that just, I think could use a little clarifying for people who might not be following this as closely is, you note that the configuration is current configuration or Elmwood 234. But what it doesn't have under Elmwood 234 is what that does to the other buildings. So like if I haven't been following this process, I might not necessarily know that that means Hopkins 5-6, middle school 7-8. So I think it's worth sort of anytime you lay those out, just making sure you're saying what the configuration changes are to those buildings. Because I think for a lot of the community, that question is a little bit opaque still. And then for the, you talked about carving out the pre-K on that one for a future study. So when it says 14 to 15,000 square feet, is that essentially what you're taking out of Marathon and what would be needed somewhere else for a pre-K, or is that in addition to space we currently use for pre-K?
It's right in between because when you remove pre-K, make it its own program, whether it's renovation or standalone, there's some inefficiencies of space needed. A nurse is an example.
Okay.
So having nurse facilities within the school. So for the most part, it is the pre-K classrooms removed and their administration and their directly associated special education needs, but then you're also duplicating nurse, a version of a family resource center, toilet rooms, boiler.
But it's not a new building that is the size of our current pre-K space plus 14 to 15,000
No,
square feet.
no,
Okay,
that's the new,
Okay.
yeah.
And then my last question, I have to find, I swear I have more. Oh, yeah. This is more on the timelines. So you mentioned that on the estimated timelines, you have May town meetings and November town meetings. We are planning to do a special town meeting for the Elmwood project in November of '23, but we don't normally have a town meeting. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial, I'm kind of thinking about it from a presentation perspective for the school committee and the district, to look at what would those timelines be if they had to be May? You know, can we move them up? Can we move them back? Getting a special town meeting is not,
It's a big deal.
it's a big deal. And so I think when we think about making this easy for people, if we could find a way to line those up in May town meetings, I think we'd be better off.
Yeah, because I think the other thing with a special town meeting is that it gives the impression that it's sort of last minute emergency, right, as opposed to well thought out and carefully constructed timeline, so it can fit into the current town meeting schedule.
The other thing, first of all, thank you for the detail of this study. I mean, it's a very important study to have, and I think as people become more and more aware, we're talking about 10-year projections, but we're also going to have about 12-month from now discussions. So this isn't going to be a 10-year decision. It's going to be a 18-month decision, or decisions will have to be made. So it's coming up very, very quickly. So it's so important to have done that. And there's a lot of numbers, a lot of graphs, a lot of charts. It takes a minute or two to understand it all, and probably 2 or 3 times through. But again, thanks for doing such a great job. I think it's going to help the community really put this all together and understand that we've got some tough decisions to make.
Anything else from the audience? Okay, well, yeah, thank you very much for putting this together, and I know there was a lot of work and a lot of iterations that went into this, so it's much appreciated, and I'm sure it will be well appreciated on Thursday as well. So, okay. If there is nothing else on that topic, we can move right along to design options updates.
Yes, I'd like to reintroduce Dawn Guariello, who you've seen.
Hi guys, I've met some of you and maybe virtually others, so nice to see you again.
So Dawn is our most senior project architect and designer, and so she's been having a hand in helping to shape the options. We're very early still in the process, so you're going to see a work in progress for each one of the buildings and sites. But what we'd love to do is, I think we've got 2 more meetings where we'll present progress before a 3rd meeting where there's a vote. So any input that you can give us now would be helpful.
Do you want to go through these, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can go through the first few. So
Sure.
I'm not going to go into detail. We just always want to bring back up visioning highlights. This is not, it's not simple to summarize the visioning into 12 points, but these are the ones that we really felt came up repetitively, iteratively, but also affect the design and the architecture most significantly. So we keep these as something to remind ourselves as we go through the options, and we always want them at the ready for conversation. This was presented last go around where we were just talking about diagrammatically how does a building come together and how some of these elements may show themselves in a plan. Not everything can be seen at the planning level, but many of them can, as you can see. The ones that are highlighted here do show up. Something like sustainability. Smart planning says you have good orientation for your classroom wings, for energy efficiency and for education, so we consider all these things. I'll start with the grade 2-3 ad reno. I won't spend a lot of time on it. This is an updated site plan. It shows an overlay of, in white, the the additions onto the kind of the hatched area, which is the existing Elmwood School. There are some portions of it that are demolished. Here we've got fields where they're located now. You can see the gas line that bisects the site. The wooded area that exists near the, closer to the entrance of the school right now is where we've located the majority of the parking. We've got site circulation shown here that, from a safety point of view, goes around the building, can be managed. But we didn't want to talk about the circulation specific. We have our traffic engineer reviewing each one of these options, so we'd like to reserve the next presentation to get more into the circulation. But what you can see here is an attempt, and this is a very constrained site, to locate the recess zones as well as the fields. The ideal would be to have them on the same side of the building and even contiguous. But because of so many dividing lines, whether it's the existing the existing building that we're adding on to, wetlands, the gas line, not easy to do. So we're not able to fully achieve the recess in the fields on the same side of the building, but we are able to utilize more of the site to meet those space needs a little bit better. As far as the plan goes, we've seen this plan before. We're building effectively new academic wings with that good solar orientation. This allows us, even though it's a renovation, to build those small learning neighborhoods even as part of a renovation, because that's an important part. And what you see in the middle are the shared spaces, music, art, the administration guidance, and some special needs programs. As a reminder, in this case, we've repurposed the existing gym to become the new cafeteria and retrofitted it with a stage. We're adding a new gymnasium, new kitchen, new boiler room. The intent would be to build as much new as possible, to get the new mechanical systems up and running, to get a new gym available so we can renovate the old gym, to get a classroom wing built so that you have space to swing space to navigate renovation inside. But it is, if the students were on site, it's a phased, occupied, a bit disruptive option to renovate the school.
I would just add on the addition renovation, it meets some of the visioning goals and but not all. Like the media center as the hub, obviously. Bob went back to it. The media center is down on the end of one of the new additions. So there are some goals that aren't achievable based on the addition renovation constraints. Just to step back, I know you've come down to two sites. What we'll show you now are two different new construction additions, new construction options on the Elmwood site, and then two different designs on the Hayden Row site with some different location site options. So same plan, but multiple site locations. I think it was alluded to earlier with the question about the potential for a pre-K there and where that building gets located. So this is the first of two on the Elmwood site. So we're calling this the bar scheme, or it's a little more linear, but as Bob mentioned, with some of the site constraints, we're tucked between the gas line, the existing building, which you can just see in the red dashed line, similar to the previous site plan. We're right up against it. I think there's some ability to tighten that new construction footprint some, but with the connection to Wood Street on the north, and then continuing to have the connection to Elm Street, this provides a little bit of relief. Down in the bottom on all of these site plans, you'll see some statistics about the site. We've got, 58 cars in a queue, 18 buses, and 264 total parking. One of the downsides of this is the sea of parking as you approach. All of these will have the arrow to the main entrance, so you can see it's kind of on the south side between, sort of at the middle of the footprint. But there is a large sea of parking where the existing field is. It's built right up against the current Elmwood building, and then when that building comes down, it would be replaced with smaller fields, courts, recess zones, as well as PE zones. If we take, yep. Do you have a question?
Yeah. As a projection, how long would it likely take to build that building while kids are still going to Elmwood? So about how long a time frame?
Yeah,
would
is
that
it just under 2 years
It's
typically?
it's 26 months.
26, yeah, so just over 2 years.
It's not going to change. But the building is staying, if Elmwood stays there, it's staying fully occupied.
Right.
So it doesn't have too much effect as the construction of the project. It's just going to be very
It's going to be very
difficult.
Disruptive.
Very
and
uncomfortable
yeah.
for the existing
Well,
buildings.
that's exactly what I was asking. So
Yeah, it doesn't
2
change the
years
timeline.
is an entire
Somewhat that's-
child
yes,
being
experience
at
there.
Elmwood experience,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Yes.
can see based on the footprint of the lower left white wing, it's kissing the building, right? So your current drop off goes away, and you would have to be using the back side of the building as the front entrance of the building for the duration of construction, and so.
And then how much longer would it take to then remove the building and add the courts and everything?
It's another 6 months.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
that's
like
a
with some
shorter phase
spring
typically.
plantings,
Yep.
so 6 to 8
about a
months.
6 month thing.
Okay.
In terms of staging construction, like all of the vehicles and things, materials, would that go in the fields where the parking is for right now? Because students, I would assume, would still
Yeah.
need to play outside at some point in the day.
Yeah, they may
Yeah.
need some of that for lay down. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I'm
for-
just curious, like where would play happen and then where would kind
There-
of construction vehicles
There would be
go?
very little room for play, even if we give little laydown area to the contractor, which we can control, it comes with cost premiums to have a satellite lot and shuttle people. But when you have to displace all the existing teacher parking and all the deliveries and whatever minor play space they have, and, it really doesn't leave a lot of room for a field play area. It becomes valuable trade space for every other competing need.
You brought up the points I was going to ask, which is where, if that's the laydown area with the new parking, where does the parking go while the new building is being built?
Where it shows we didn't chat about it, but where it shows the parking would essentially be the temporary teacher parking as well for the existing building.
So you just
We
part
would
of it
only
for-
take, like,
okay.
say, a third of that area as a laydown. Now, we can't lay stuff down on the gas line, because we don't, that would have to be its own negotiation and deal with that entity. We wouldn't want to load it, because they have restrictions on what you can do on their easement. So I don't know that we could park on it or do anything along those lines.
What we generally see on sites that are like this tight with this is we give them a certain number of parking spots, and that's all they have. So they either have to carpool in or some other way to get to the site.
Yeah.
They can't have
The construction.
construction work.
Right. No, I got that. I got that.
Teachers
That
might
was
want to
like-
consider it too,
That
though.
wasn't, yeah,
So
it's not the worst
that would
idea.
be great, but that's what we would end up doing, is splitting that
Keep it
parking lot up and giving the contractor what we can give them.
Right.
Tim or Mike, do you know if there's a restriction on parking on that? Because I think your parking in Elmwood stops right when you cross over the gas line. The road crosses over it, but the parking stops right there, and then it picks up again on the other side of it.
It just depends on whatever the easement says.
Yeah, I think we're not allowed to park on it.
Right, so even, Don, something we should look at, the inside of that loop, we
Yep.
could have the
Yep.
loop, but we would lose those dozen visitor spaces.
Yes, we can adjust that.
I'm gonna bring this up one more time, I've done it 2 or 3 times. But this is a 2-story plan. Is there some educational reason we can't make 3 stories? And the reason I get to this is the footprint becomes smaller. I suspect there'd be energy savings because we have less wall that's sticking out. And if school people say, no, we don't want our little kids going 3 stories, just tell me now and I'll stop bringing it up. But I look at this and I say, this could be a third smaller if it were 3 stories instead of 2. And I suspect I'll say the same thing on the next one.
So
It is 3 stories.
it's 3 stories, but it's
It is.
also, I
Yeah.
didn't point out, and I should, that this is the 2 to 4 grade configuration.
This is-
So this is 3
It's 3
grades
stories,
in
3
this, yes.
To Mike's
Yes.
point, if it was the 2-grade configuration, you could reduce the footprint.
Yes.
Yes.
And still stay
You
at
could.
3 stories.
Okay.
Right now,
I
this
got
is
you.
3 grades,
Thank you.
3 stories.
You're
You
welcome. I think that helps clarify if you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, it's the larger of the buildings, and I think, so the GR 2 to 4 is giving you the grade configuration
Yeah.
at the beginning. The addition renovation was 2-3 only. Okay,
Gotcha.
What that
thank
might
you.
do is take that wing off that's closest to Elmwood.
Yep.
So we're not
And
pushing
make
go
the
for 4
construction of it
stories.
a little bit easier.
Yeah, if it were to go to a
If it were to
2
go to
grade.
3 stories.
Yeah, what
3 stories,
Dan's
yeah.
saying
Yeah,
is,
pencil.
So if you go back one slide, so Dan and I
Sure.
chatted about this, so what we were saying is if it was the smaller school here, it certainly fits better on this site. You could eliminate that leftmost
That left.
wing and then
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
maintain some sort of access to your front door.
I can, all right, good.
So that's a nice lead-in. Thank
Thank
you. To the floor plan. And these are all a work in progress. There are improvements that need to be made. What this does do is creates that media center hub as you walk in the main entry. It's kind of a focal point. You've got the academic wing splaying out, and then the community and shared spaces to the north. But again, to your point, this is the 3-story with the larger 2, 3, and 4 grade configuration. We spoke a little bit about what the constraints on this site mean, and building up against the existing building, how disruptive that is. I know there's been some talk about displacing the students and moving them to a temporary location. I don't know if that's still something worth considering, but as we looked at new construction and the size of the footprint needed for the grade 2 through 4 configuration, we said, well, what if you move those students for the 2 years that this project needs to be built in order to place the building in a good location, have proper solar orientation, have good access both off of Wood Street as well as Elm Street. What does that do? So you can see that this building footprint, we're calling this the Elmwood Village. You'll see a similar village design over similar but different in that it's sort of a spoked hub, right? Like you have that central shared space in the middle. I'll get to the floor plan in a minute, but the academic wings splay off of that. And what this does is gives you a little relief at the front. You have more fields, you have the courts, you have a separate bus and car drop. You still sort of have that sea of parking, and again, we can adjust based on the gas line, but in order to build the new building and then replace the fields with the parking, you still end up with a substantial amount at the front in order to meet your 264 spots. But what this does do is tucks it nicely on the site. It's not, constrained right up against Wood Street or Elm Street.
This is the stuff that scares me.
And has a nice welcoming entry. You can see where the dark arrow is. It has recess and PE zones around the building. Some are near the fields, but again, with some of the constraints, we're limited here.
And this would have no room for expansion, right?
Yep, so you can see, it's hard maybe to see, but on the ends of each of the academic wings, there is a dashed line, and what that does is indicates where we might be able to expand in the form of multi-story classroom expansion in the future.
Could you, an estimate of how much? I mean, it looks like a small little line, 10%? Okay.
But this, again, this option, as you brought up at the beginning, we've talked about it here. I don't know where we put the kids for
Right.
2 years. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, there's not a place for us to, even if we brought in modulars, we don't have a space. We found no problem finding open spaces to build a school. There's not one sitting around waiting for us to temporarily house kids.
8-story modulars.
And I'm guessing whatever we did is non-MSBA reimbursable if we had the temp students.
Yeah, off-site and temporary swing spaces are non-reimbursable. So you pay more to move them off-site, you save with a shorter overall duration and a better end product in terms of your ideal layout, but it's not enough to offset the off-site cost. The off-site school will cost more than the savings. Got it.
But what it doesn't do is disrupt the students in their entire, 2 years at that school. But it would in the sense that they're in a temporary space, but there's not construction, directly adjacent and on site. Maybe not ideal, but always worth considering. And this would be the floor plan for that. And again, we have, I'm already drawing some improvements here to tighten it up a little bit and get that northernmost academic wing a little bit closer to that hub and heart of the school with the media center, and having the gym and CAF, I'll go back for a second, adjacent to the zones of the fields and the play and PE spaces outside. And again, this is the 3-story because we're looking at the 2 through 4 grade configurations.
And can I just point out that
Sure.
264 parking spaces for the number of families that we're anticipating being in a school that big isn't anywhere, like for a back to school night or anything that we would host families at. that's not even close to what would be needed, right?
That's what's required from a zoning perspective for that
Yeah.
size
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
In my experience in a different school district, we have a big new beautiful building with the last two we've done, and the parking is a challenge, and you do have to stack parent nights and parent evenings just like you do right now because they can't all be there at the same time. But I think that has to do with how many you're permitted and reimbursement rates for that area
It's
too.
a lot down to the zoning of it, and then
Yeah.
whether or not you would create a large sea of parking for one or two events a year kind of thing.
The zoning bylaw determines how many spaces are required.
Yeah.
We ran into this with Marathon, and the same question came up. What are we gonna do for parents' night? And what are we gonna do when the teachers are there, the parents are there? And Marathon, we had the opportunity to use a portion or all of the parking over at the athletic fields. It was right adjacent to it. Of course, we don't have that here. So either you make some different accommodation, have multiple family nights you have for different grades, or some, that's why you all get the big bucks, you'll figure that out.
Well, I would certainly say that's a con to this site, is
Yeah.
that, yes,
That's right.
that, you know, given the constraints,
Yes.
there's no flexibility in
And we all know
overflow.
there's lots of constraints.
The parking, the bylaws in town strive for this type of a parking
Yeah.
setup where you actually see the green grass strip between each mow. You know, on Marathon, we had to get a variance,
We-
use the
we
Dover
did.
Amendment to not put all the grass strips to try and fit the parking on. So that is another challenge that we'll have to go through in this project.
With Marathon, they had a friend that was working in the building department who came up with that stuff. He's less friendly now.
One last question. So you have recess set up for the outdoor spaces and fields, but one of the top 12 things is also indoor-outdoor learning. And it doesn't seem, like, I don't know if all of the designs have that stuff in it, but it doesn't, I don't get a feel for where is that the outdoor learning piece where the kids can actually have their hands in things and doing stuff.
I think the hope is that, and if you think back, and I worked on it, so it's always in my mind, but the outdoor learning courtyards in between the academic wings, in a perfect world, they'd be a little more separated than they are here, in that the flow of that indoor and outdoor. So
Okay.
you can see like the
So
kind of
maybe
the
it's
three
like a
fingers. In between them, and we had done like a whole little
Right.
fly through in the interview. If you can think back that long, it's been months, but the hope is that there are always those both visual and physical connections, indoor and outdoor, and start to blur the lines so that students feel the weather changing and, you know, the rain falling today, as they're either moving through the building or you know, learning in a space, that they're sensing that. And the outdoor learning courtyards are probably the most used spaces for that sort of connection. That doesn't mean that the front entry won't have it and that there won't be other indoor-outdoor connections, but from a learning, students in their classroom and a, you know, throughout the day standpoint, that is where we intend to build those connections.
We can identify them a little more clearer on the next round.
Yeah, I think that's what I was asking. It would be nice to see that
Sure.
in the diagram.
That's a great question, thank you.
Can I just ask a question about the recess spaces that you have there? Are we suggesting a playground in each of these locations, or are we saying a central playground and maybe?
At this
I know
level-
that's pretty granular. I
Yeah,
apologize.
well, at this level, I think what we tried to do was understand the number of recess zones that would be required for the prorated amount.
Yeah.
And zoned them. We haven't necessarily determined,
Got it.
what they are exactly.
Our landscape architects work directly with us to make those architectural and landscape connections, and they're really good about providing variety and choice to the students. So there may be some cases where there's structured play, and working with them in the past, they've got more natural play areas. There are, you know, physical things, there are sensory things. So they will, as we hone in on a design and work further with them, we'll start to identify what that means. And in this case, I think it's preferred that they be contiguous, is what I thought I heard.
Yeah.
In this scenario, because of the constraints again with this site, I think it's probably not as achievable to have that many. So we can talk to the users more and hear more feedback from you guys about what the ideal situation if they were to be
Yeah.
separated, what that would
Yeah, I
mean.
think that would just become a whole nother scheduling thing for the administration as they're scheduling their classes. Now they're scheduling their recess as well.
Yeah.
You know, these classrooms are on playground day.
Yeah.
Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.
The size of those playgrounds looks beautiful compared to others.
I
That's
wish-
a problem I would love to have.
I was shocked how small the play at the current Elmwood was when I saw it, yes.
And are they, they're scheduled now, aren't they? Because there's the different zones.
Yeah.
And it would actually probably be a little bit easier, although you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
If you had more options. Right now, we have one tiny space. So that's why scheduling it is so challenging.
Yeah, so as we get more of that feedback and hone in, we'll be able to start to identify what that means and then show you options for them. I won't spend too long. Again, I've made some refinements already to some of these plans, but in getting the music closer to the CAF and stage, so we're just always looking to improve some of these. But the general concept is the same in that the media center is the hub, the learning spaces, we're trying to get as close to north-south exposure as possible to control the natural light. We're looking at breakout spaces and the neighborhoods within the academic wing, so all of that comes into play with all of these designs. Okay, so those are the two Elmwood. So let's move to the Hayden Row. And again, we've got two different floor plans and both of them have two site plans. So bear with me. I'm going to go through we're calling it the pinwheel. It's basically it's a different sort of hub with more linear 3 academic wings, if you want to say that they're pinwheeling off of them in a geometric way. And in this location, we're sort of on the easternmost side. So you can see Hayden Row's off on the left and Marathon's off screen north. What we're doing is providing a large field in between that connection and also providing vehicular access both from the Marathon current access point as well as off of Hayden Row to relieve and pulse all of that traffic off of Hayden Row and onto the campus.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be the goal in these site plans. In this case, the main entrance is facing west. You can see the black arrow. So you view it as you approach from Hayden Row. And you have a separate bus drop, which is the orange circle. So the bus comes in, drops students at the front, and then the cars would come in likely around the building and drop from the passenger side and have access to that front plaza. Again, we're working through with traffic how to, which direction things are, but from a safety standpoint, you want those separated, you want the students getting out the passenger side, either from the bus or the cars. Most of the parking is near the fields, which is nice, but also closer to Hayden Row. There'd be a bit of a walk from it to the building. But what this does have is the connected recess spaces that we just talked about. We're able to achieve sort of more contiguous recess spaces directly adjacent to the additional fields off on the east, just to the right of the screen. And that allows for the students to always have access between those as they play. With the PE zones, you'll see in the plan that kind of piece that jets to the south is the gymnasium, so they can come straight out from PE and access the outdoor spaces as well as the courts. What am I forgetting here? That's most of this site plan.
So that's pretty much, from a location perspective on the site, that's pretty much as far down
Yes.
as it can go.
That's correct. And not quite as far east as it can go, but you don't want to bury it in the site either. You want that
right.
connection.
Yeah, but that's sort of, you're sort of pushing again, we have two properties there, the one that the Marathon was built on, and then this adjacent one, this is as far sort of into the new one
Yes.
as you can get.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That's helpful.
Great. Different. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's just when I was asking before about the pre-K, right? I think these are the plans where there's so much space.
Yes.
That it would be nice to just to see
What,
a circle.
15,000 square
Here's
feet
where
looks
it
like?
could be,
Sure.
and incorporated into a whole campus.
Yeah. We can look at a footprint, just, and
Right.
are you thinking just a box? To
Yeah,
say,
just a box,
here's
like
approximately-
here's space that is left that could be used to move the pre-K and have a connected campus with the pre-K here.
Okay, and we would have to take that traffic into consideration as we consider campus roads, okay?
Leah, just so you know, if you look at the appendix to the district-wide study, there's a nice little picture in there for you.
Okay.
You have to dig through the appendix, but
No.
it's in there.
It's in there. Okay, so,
Thank
I do
you.
have a question connected to the recess space. On the previous drawings, you had shown them kind of on both sides of the building. Is it just a space in the road, the car drop that just has them on one side of the building? I'm curious just about if there's kids all the way on the other side, how far of a haul that could be, you know, if second graders ended up on that side of the building.
From a recess standpoint, I think they could get out the ends of each academic wing.
Got it.
To get there.
To
Yep,
get there.
either through the courtyard or out the end where the addition dashes to the east are shown. The one on the west, they'd have to probably come through that part of the school, like nearby the gym. I'm about to get to the floor plans, but we can look at where that is. If it's preferred that they be distributed, I think that's accomplishable, but I think what we thought we heard was that it was better to have them contiguous from a staffing standpoint, to have sort of full view of the kids so that you didn't need, you can imagine if you have 3 different recess zones, but only 2 teachers, that could become problematic from an oversight standpoint. So there's a little bit of flexibility here. We took a stab at what we thought we heard, so.
Can you explain what it means that the service is located off the bus loop? So the timing, that means you can't accept deliveries during arrival and dismissal times, is that true?
Yeah, I think what Ashley was getting at there, and it actually looks like it's in the car loop. So I wonder if that's a typo, but yeah, so there would always be access there.
And does that mean that if it's part of the car loop, which is what it looks like, that the service trucks and things would be going through
No.
recess?
That's what this would suggest, but that's, I think, one of the reasons why we didn't want to go too deep into circulation, because some of this, I think, is coded backwards from what it should be, and so we want to make sure that our traffic engineer really puts
And
the
that's
foot
our
on it.
current situation, and it's not good.
Right.
But that the bus and the service
Well,
have to coordinate.
The only way to get to the kitchen drop-off area, for example, has trucks driving through where kids should be able to play.
Okay,
And that
noted.
creates a difficulty.
Understood.
So, I mean, this scenario could be where the service is located, because that's on the opposite of
It's the opposite
Brookline, where you- and because the admin was at the front where the bus stop is, but you could turn around a 3-point turn and head back out and not, you know, it could be a fire lane / parent pickup for the rest of the blue, you know, depending on what you're doing. There are variants we can look at.
Yeah, and I would say it's our mandate to not have to cross any live traffic, open road for any of the play.
But I imagine, Tim, as you work with your people, you try to not schedule deliveries at the crush of pickup and drop off.
Yeah, I think what Ann's probably referring to is, you know, you can't control UPS and FedEx and those guys. We schedule the ones we can schedule,
Right,
but
yeah.
the ones we can't, I think are probably your worst offenders, so.
We will do our best to not have that be a, chronic problem. And obviously in a new construction.
Nothing to worry about,
Yes.
except our current situation creates something that is hard to manage.
Got it. Well, I think here to someone's point that you could get back out, so I think that would negate that as a con, so we'll correct that. This is a alternative location on that same site with the same footprint. It is closer to that connecting piece between Marathon, which is just off the screen to the north, and then the Hayden Row access you can see is off on the screen left. So not tucked so deep into the site, but more centralized. And in this case, we're suggesting that the building is, I think it's flipped, right? Yeah, so the front entrance is on the east side. So as you approach, you either access from the north and come around to the front entrance. You can see that dark black arrow kind of on the, yeah, and then, or you come from the backside of Hayden Row and around. So the front entrance is actually facing east in this solution. So it's a mirrored footprint from the other. And what you see here is that there's contiguous recess, PE zones nearby to the gym. The fields are a little bit disconnected in this one from those. And then the parking is mostly on the east, obviously, you know, directing you to the front entrance. I don't think I'm missing anything else here. It looks like there's visitor parking closer to the front entrance and then staff parking a little bit farther east. The footprint is showing the first option, so with the entrance on the left, but if you imagine this whole thing flipped, it's what I just showed in the second option, second site plan option. But the main entrance takes you into this sort of centralized community space with the gym and the cafeteria bookending the heart of the school, the media center. You've got admin right near the main entrance, and then of course the academic wings with ideal north-south facing classrooms. So this is one of the best sustainable footprints that we're showing. And again, we're 3 stories because we're grades 2 through 4. We don't want the footprint to get too large. These are young students that we don't want traveling throughout the building so far. And we've got music near the caf and the stage and art upstairs.
I have a accessibility question. So if we have 3 different wings on the 3rd floor that are completely separate from each other, and you have a child with a physical disability, would you need elevators in every wing?
Technically, yes. I pointed that out to others working on this, and I'm trying to consolidate so that they are connected.
Okay.
And in this case, I would actually argue you still might want 2 elevators because the students are so young that to have them, you know, you don't want someone to have to travel from one of the more distant classrooms to the centralized space where the elevator likely would be. We just did something similar in a pre-K to 2, put in 2 elevators even though the code only requires 1 for that reason. So. That's one of the refinements I'm hoping to make, so.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yes, great question. Okay, so those were the same footprint again, just mirrored.
I like this one, yeah.
This is the Hayden Row Village, different than the Elmwood Village option, but similar in that it's kind of a spoked hub around the heart of the school. In this case, we're tucked deep again, similar to option 1 with the pinwheel I just showed you. We're deeper into the site, farther south and east from Marathon, which is off on the screen to the north. Hayden Row access is from the left, the west. We've got separate bus and car loops. We've got the contiguous recess, PE zones. Again, the fields are the space in between Marathon and this proposed building location. We've got quite a bit of parking kind of to the south of them that both provides parking for fields for community use, but also staff parking there, and sort of a more grand front entrance plaza. Some outdoor play kind of around the building, and then of course we talked about the outdoor learning is similar
Yeah, I was
concept
gonna say here
Yes.
there's a lot more of the non-recess labeled
Yes.
green space all around.
Yeah, and that's where you see some of the relief of this site come into play, will be in that kind of outdoor connection and flexibility of landscaping and other uses outside where you're not so constrained with the other site. If there's no questions or comments, this is the more centralized location, and again we flipped the building, mirrored it, so if you take it and flip it like a book, on the other side the front entrance is east facing. You approach either from the north, from the Marathon access point, or from the south, the Hayden Row, and you come around the building to the front entrance. The parking's deeper in the site. It's sort of separated here from the fields with all the recess PE zones. So you can imagine that whole space to the north of the building's really student-based, right? They can get to the fields and recess spaces, PE zones, without ever crossing any sort of campus road or street. There's plenty of connectivity from that big square on the top is the gymnasium. and off of the heart of the school. And what that will do is allow the students to free flow to all the outdoor play spaces.
So the fields aren't typically, I don't think, part of the elementary school. If we have PE and recess zones, we don't also need a field. So I would
Okay.
think that the field is part of like rec department.
Community.
And the community. So in this situation, to think that that's soccer or baseball or softball, the parking seems really far away.
Far.
I don't know if it is in
Yeah.
reality.
No,
And maybe it can be, if it's close enough to Marathon, if some of these, you can walk from one to the other, then you could probably use shared parking spaces.
I would think, yep, that you would have both, and we may be able to get some along either that campus road on either side of it. That may be, you know, a better use for the community coming to use the fields or even the playground, frankly.
No, I do. Okay.
And do the students use the field during recess? Because what's shown here in the blue bubbles would be more structured play recess, like, you know, structures, playgrounds, athletic type of workout things.
So this field would be like an open space for running,
Yeah.
for example. We use our field for PE, but only because we don't have a separate PE space. So, I guess I don't know what a typical school.
I think your problem is that you don't, for recess, you don't have good access to those fields.
And we don't have any place for someone who likes to run
Yeah,
to just run.
yeah. So I think what Jeff's suggesting is with the field up here, you would have that opportunity.
If you were at recess, maybe there's a track around it and kids could run. Yeah.
Right, essentially, you know, this particular option with the bus drop-off loop, it's a non-occupied asphalt space during the day, so it's more contiguous to the building itself, and you let the kids out to both the field and the structured play in the blue diagrams in this scenario.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as a parent who's dealt with the high school bus loop and everything, I really like that separate bus loop, like that completely different area where it's not like a temptation to go in because it's a completely different path.
Right.
I like that.
And at the younger elementary, sometimes we've used that as hard play and painted it in ways of hopscotch, jumping zone, you know, what's it called? Foursquare? Yeah. So that's an opportunity as well, and kind of something fun that can be, you know, used throughout the day. So this is the floor plan for that. Again, on that last scheme, it would be mirrored, so just use your imagination. But again, we're looking at a hub plan with the spokes being the academic wings feeding off of that centralized media center. Again, I'm trying to connect the third floor, so I'm working on it. And we've got the CAF and the gym and the admin all up front in that sort of central. This is akin to what we showed at the interview, which really speaks to having a community space up front, the more private academic wings with the courtyards, outdoor learning really built into and in between those academic wings. I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Any questions on that one? I don't mean to go forward without.
That one's going to be a lot easier to resolve, the connection on the third floor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That looks like it.
Questions from the committee?
I guess this is a question for Jeff. Yeah. When we cited Marathon, we cited it on the best of the two possible locations, as you may recall. It was Upland compared to this. This along the Hayden Road side has a lot of wetland. My question is, before we go too crazy trying to cite the school, do we have any engineers out there, you know, flagging wetlands or anything at this point so we can find out where in fact we can actually do it? It may not be a bad thing to do earlier rather than later, because I hate to design something heavy if you might buy it and find out it's going to cost us a fortune to put it there because of the wetland. I'd rather know where they are now and then design a school around it. That's just an option.
You know, we talked about releasing the survey now, soon, right, and then that comes with the wetlands.
It could be not absolutely, you know, like we do for a subdivision or something like that, but enough so we know that maybe we don't want to have it as close to Hayden Road Street as what we like. because we know it's winter.
No, we
winter.
planned on doing
It'd be
that.
great to know that stuff before we go too crazy.
Right, so if you want to go back a slide. So what Mike's referring to is in the upper left corner, you see a dashed white oval, kidney shaped kind of, and so right now you're bumping up against where that orange bus lane is, and so that wetland may have changed and morphed over time, and just may shift this option a little more closer to the right side of the drawing, and so.
Most of those residents on Hayden Row on that side have water in their backyard. That we know all too well.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking maybe
It's an excellent
look
point,
at it
yeah.
sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's a good point. And anything we're showing here is kind of off of GIS, which as we know
It gets
is
better
not
as you go
always-
back.
Update, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
But I think this option, even if you did slide it in, there's, with the size of that field, there's ability
Yeah.
to juggle the components and
Yeah.
still deliver the same concept.
Yeah.
My one question with this layout as opposed to the other layout looked like it had like a 2-floor media center. And we were talking about the media center sort of being the center of everything. In this layout, the media center is on the 2nd floor, and it's kind of not something you go into. I'm not saying wrong or right, but I'm just saying like if the concept was a media center that was central to the sort of entrance place, this one has it way out of the way.
I can say, in this version where it's 3 stories, it's actually central to the academics. So you've got a floor above and below, and it's right in the middle. But it can be designed in such a way so that when you walk in, it actually does have a presence, even if it's on the 2nd floor.
Okay.
I think there's also an opportunity to, with that 3rd floor connection of the 3 wings, to make that a 2-story volume.
I
You know,
see.
with a kind of catwalk above, then that connects the wings and connects access.
Okay.
I have my marching orders. No, I love it. That's great feedback, so thank you.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much for all that.
Thank you. Good work.
Thank you. You'll see more. It's ever evolving, so.
It's
hopefully
amazing
improving.
to see it get more and more detailed.
Yes.
So the takeaway of the last couple options there, I didn't hear any deal breakers. You know, if there are things that fall off, by all means, as we go through each of these meetings, let us know, because that lets the design team hone in on the pieces and the modifications you do like, and the other things can kind of start to fall off. So you may see between this meeting and future meetings that, you know, we stop on a particular option where it is, not to mean that it goes away, but we focus on other ones and refinements of those other ones, and then you get to the end product next month to your actual recommendation.
And we have to continue to look at like the addition renovation 2-3 option, that we have to keep looking at that.
Yeah.
Just wanted
But
to
they
be
gave
sure.
you 2 today, so.
Yeah. Great options for what space was available.
It does make me wonder if
But
we
it
should.
doesn't seem like the right solution.
No, I mean, it's up to you guys. I mean, like the ad rental, I think there's a general consensus that it does not deliver the program. We know it can only do the 2-3. We do have to estimate it out and carry it forward, but, you know, it doesn't, the trade-offs are probably not worth the end game with maintaining it, but we would need to carry it through the completion of the report.
The completion of the report that we'll be submitting in March.
And,
Correct.
yeah,
Right, so
March.
once we kind of get through this next stage of the process,
Yes.
Yeah.
if
then
it
goes
continues
away.
the way that
Yeah.
we're all feeling it's going to go, it will then go away.
will
It's
then
only
go
got like another month and a half. to
That's
go.
great.
But by February, you'll be ideally making your selection of the options you want to move forward with to stay on track.
It will probably look the same in February
Yes.
because we will be focused on the
On
others.
the others. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate, I think Mrs. Carver's point, I think getting parking a little closer to the building, I'm looking at this option here.
Yep.
That's tough.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's not so bad in the warmer months, but in the colder months,
Yeah.
it can be a little rough.
It's a hike.
And then recess areas, if we're not crossing any roads to get to recess play areas, I think that's going to be a big deal for
Well,
us.
and the
So
other
hopefully we
thing-
can do that.
That's a good point, Tim. If you think about like using the school at night, the after-school program, for example, they
Yeah.
park at the top of our driveway.
Yeah.
And when
Security.
they come out at 6 o'clock at night, it's pitch black.
Yep.
It's a long walk and on a winter night for them.
Yeah, so I think those would be just kind of my comments to it as you're kind of honing in
Yeah,
on it.
great.
Is keeping the play areas within the within the building space if we can.
Got it, thank you.
And there was one picture that showed the art rooms kind of separated. And I wonder if there's a way to keep the same way you did with music, have the art. It was,
The Hayden Row Village.
yeah, it was 2-4 on the village.
Yep.
The other way, about yeah. No. Hayden Row, oh wait,
Keep going.
sorry, this one.
It's this
Keep
one.
going, yeah.
Yep, there you go.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Looks like the
So
art
there,
rooms
got it,
are
yep.
kind of
Well,
far
when
apart.
we adjust the media center, I will back to back those so they can share like a project space.
Yeah, that would
Yep, great.
What kinds of things will the traffic study look at for these options? Is it just the flow of traffic, or I guess from a traffic standpoint, what would we look at?
That's what we've asked them to look at is the entrances and how to get in and out, and to make sure we're not making, based on his previous work that he's done already, make sure that we're not putting any planning things into play here that are not gonna work with what his suggestions are thus far.
And I think he's aiming to get everything on campus,
Yes.
off Hayden Row,
Yeah.
and also looking at safety, which side of the vehicle students are getting off at, what the separation is, where the access points are. He'll weigh in on all of that. So typically in all of our projects when we use him. he's
Yeah,
great.
I think you have some of that on here, but I think clear path for buses, probably especially buses between the Marathon School and the new Elmwood School would be important, because I think Susan could probably speak to it better than I can, but they're gonna share, potentially share kids, right? So they're dropping off at Marathon
Take
and
the
then
buses
Elmwood,
off.
or
Yeah.
vice versa, yeah, and to keep those from having to go back out.
Back out.
and
Yeah.
back on.
We don't want that.
I think our intent for him would be to add the arrowheads to those little bags.
Yes.
Yeah, he'll often weigh in on turning
Yeah.
radiuses and showing the buses in the queue and how they arrive and everything. So it'll be another layer of detail that we'll get into with him.
Right, eventually there may be a need for gate, like service gates, or to get buzzed through, depending on the ultimate option you guys pick, that you
Yeah.
have things that can be gated, either between the connection to Marathon or between the recess and the active zones. And so
Yeah.
there'll be options to add restrictions, should they be needed.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
Tim, do you think the possible future connection to, what is it, Blueberry Lane on the back side of the site is something that should factor into this at all?
I'd leave that
I
question to
doubt,
Mr. Shepard.
I doubt that's possible. That parcel was, there was a conservation recreation restriction put on when they did that subdivision. And of course, it's never been used by anybody. It's only on the plan because we know the town owns it. But, in terms of, you'd have to go to conservation if clearly a ball field fits in the recreation thing. You just have to convince them that it fits in the recreation thing. And whatever neighbors from the subdivision that have never been able to use it. They might
Yeah.
love it, who knows? But there's one little road that goes up to it from that subdivision, and there's only one house on it. But,
I mean, it would be a great option if we could put it in as even a restricted use type of thing. So I think it'd be worth
Next
digging
couple-
into.
next couple
was
days,
thinking
I'll pull the documents and see what they say.
I was thinking more high level, because just looking at the two site plans that were presented, if you have a road on this side of the site or that side of the site, that decision alone informs whether or not any future use of that connection could ever exist.
Yeah, any road that goes out the other side of the site is gonna go out onto Wild Road, which is a skinny little road to start with.
Yep.
So it's probably not a viable option, but I'll pull the paperwork and share it with you.
I like that when we wrap these meetings up, Mike always has homework to do.
Any other questions on the design options? Okay. If there's no objection, I'd actually like to flip the last two agenda items, because preparing for our next forum, I think is actually a bit informed by the way the schedule of meetings lays out that even goes beyond this group. So just want to walk through where we're sort of going from here on, as I keep saying, what is an action-packed January and February from a building project perspective. So some of these are our meetings, some of these are related to the project slightly, some of these would require our attendance, others it's if you want to watch it on TV or you want to show up, it's up to you. After tonight, the next, as we discussed earlier, the school committee is meeting this Thursday right here in HCAM. And part of their agenda will be to discuss the district-wide study that we were just presented. We, as always, you've probably seen an invitation of a posted joint ESBC and school committee meeting. We do that simply as a matter of course to make sure that we're never in violation of open meeting law. That is not a meeting that I think anyone from this group is necessarily required to attend. And if you do, just really be as audience members. That's a meeting where Perkins is really presenting to the school committee. Obviously worth tuning into, watching, because it will have downstream impacts on what we're going to be doing. There is no decisions that are going to be made at that meeting. Then we have several forums that are coming up, some of which are on the schedule, some of which will get added in. On the 11th, there is a faculty forum that is all faculty are being, all faculty have been invited to all of them, but all faculty are being invited to this one. It will be followed by a meeting or a forum on the 12th at the Senior Center at 10 a.m. This is generally speaking, it's the agenda we're going to talk about, but this is generally speaking meant to be a project update, trying to reach an audience that we have not necessarily been able to reach with our currently scheduled evening public forums. So this is one where the expectation would be that we'll probably go over some ground we've already covered, because we'll be expecting sort of the Senior Center, and we're also advertising it with the moms group and the PTO and trying to capture some demographics that we maybe aren't as able to join us at the 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock weeknight kind of stretches. The school committee has a meeting that night on January 12th, where they will be discussing, as I understand it from the chair of the school committee, that they will begin discussing the grade configuration. And I believe also part of that is going to be an extended public forum for discussion of grade configuration as well, according to the chair today. Again, we'll post for it. You're not necessarily, this group's not required to attend, just in case there are 4 of us there, and in case we talk to each other, it's always better to actually have something posted.
One question, clarification. On the 12th, it's for grade configuration or for budget, or both?
I believe it's budget.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So the 12th public meeting we're having is budget, because we have to give our budget recommendation by the end of January. And there's a lot of budget contention going on, so we want to hear from the public.
Okay, so maybe we need to connect about that, because Nancy and I talked today, and I thought she said that was going to be on the 12th.
Maybe
So-
it is both.
What's that?
It may be both.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, it might be both.
Yeah.
And it was originally scheduled for budget, but we may have incorporated this as
Incorporate
well.
both, okay, maybe that's what, okay.
That would make sense.
But grade configuration is definitely on the agenda for that meeting
Yeah.
regardless. The one, and then we meet on the 17th, where we will discuss updates to these site plans, but we'll still be awaiting direction on grade configuration, but I think we'll start refining kind of down towards what these options are. There is, so on this schedule that we've all been looking at, it projects that the school committee will deliberate and vote on grade configuration at their January 19th meeting. My understanding from discussion with the chair today is that is not going to happen. So she would like to push that to the 2nd of February, which in discussions with Jeff and others doesn't really heavily impact us from a project perspective. It's just more about how much time we have as a committee to take the decision that comes from it and deliberate on options. So that 19th meeting, I would expect that there will be discussion of grade configuration, but it is not expected at this point that there will be a vote. We have another community forum scheduled for the 24th, which will probably just serve as, again, a project update at that point and sort of where we're getting to in the different site options. The 26th potential meeting is not happening here. Again, the school committee's chair is looking to target the 2nd for that vote. We will meet on the 31st, where we'll continue to, again, discuss refined options. We won't have the final grade configuration. I would expect, again, it's up to the full committee. The discussion that I had with Jeff a little bit in talking about the impacts of the timeline of delaying that vote are, I mean, we could really get to, as a committee, kind of an option A, option B. We know that ultimately the school committee is deciding between two grade configurations. So there's no reason that sort of on the 31st, we're not taking a vote, but we can sort of have it narrowed down. If they go this direction, here's where we're going. If they go that direction, here's where we're going. And so I think that's what we'll try to track to, just so we can stay on track. I would like to ask people to pencil in, and we'll check availability and pencil in the possibility of a February 6th meeting. So a meeting in between the 31st and the 13th. I don't think at this point that we'll need it, but given that there is a bit of a delay in the original timeline, if we need to, for some reason, meet on the 6th, I think it will be good to hold that as an option in case. Then we'll meet on the 13th. At that point, we will have our final deliberation and vote. We can stay on track to go back to the school committee for endorsement 3 days later, and the select board for endorsement on the 28th. So what I mostly wanted to make well, first of all, there's a lot of meetings. So I wanted to make sure that we said all of those out loud, but make people aware of a bit of an adjustment in the expected timeline from the school committee, but also some of those additional forums that aren't necessarily showing up right now on the meeting timeline. I will, Jeff and Chris, maybe we can work together to update this and get a revised version out to the full committee so that we have aspects of all of that. If you, as always, if you see, Georgette does a great job getting these meetings posted and then getting invites out to everybody. If you see an invite and you're wondering, what the heck is this? Am I supposed to attend? Just ask me. We can figure that out. But there are going to be a lot more meeting invites on your calendar necessarily than meetings you have to attend. But again, just let's make sure we're paying attention to the process so we can follow that along.
Is that true for all of us, Jeff?
Tim, I'll leave that up to you.
I appreciate it.
You can invite people as optional too, and then people would know that this is something you can decide for yourself about.
That's a good point.
Click the little person.
Well, I think when we get the schedule out too, we'll put in there like what are the absolute ESBC required and what we're just posting. But that's a good point too.
Yeah.
And maybe for the 11th faculty forum, an invitation should go soon from Georgette, just so people can put it on their calendar. Because I don't see one.
Okay. Any questions at this point on those meetings? No. Okay. So thank you for indulging the switch, but I think that context was necessary for when we talk about the forum on the 12th. So again, forum on the 12th is 10 a.m. at the Senior Center. We are, Lisa is working directly with the Senior Center on the logistics and arrangements. We are working with the Senior Center as well as the PTO and the Moms Group on marketing those forums. They are obviously open to everyone in the community, but we're targeting those groups specifically. So, what do we want to discuss in terms of?
No, you nailed it in the sense that it's both a recap to the audiences that we haven't reached to date. So we'll bring them up on the overall timeline, the MSBA process, and the narrowing of options that happened in the fall. And then we'll present the current options as the state that they're at in terms of where we go from here with the overall timeline. So it'll be both a recap of the last 5 months worth of work and then a presentation to the community. So besides our meeting tonight, there'll be another opportunity to see all the options that we were just presented with.
I have a question on that. As they get refined, you want to show them what we saw tonight. I'm not comfortable showing something
Correct.
different than what you see, just for
Correct.
clarity.
Yep, no,
Okay.
great
Okay.
point, Don. Yep.
Yes.
Any questions about that? Seem good for the agenda? Okay. All right, then we have reached the end of our agenda for tonight. Any other business or questions that anyone has? So, as if people need to hear me say it again. Our next, we have a couple of forums coming up. The community forum on the 12th, there's faculty forum on the 11th. Our next committee meeting will be January 17th at 6 p.m. right here in HCAM Studios. And if there's nothing else, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Leah, second by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we are adjourned at, we'll call it 7:52. Thank you very much. Have a good night.